Greetings everyone, and welcome to the next level of Tenkaichi. We are pressing forward to the realm of the unlimited, so brace yourselves. For those of you who have not yet seen the Tenkaichi Depth series, I highly recommend you do that first, otherwise you may not fully understand the concepts that are being discussed here. Concepts like focal adherence, orientation, grounded will, shift manipulation, and much more. We're going to be diving into some new concepts as well, but understand that this is the big fish pond. We're past the basics now, so if you want to play with the big boys, leave the dumb questions at the door. I'm not going to waste time explaining things that have already been covered in the Depth series, at least not any more than I have to for the purpose of this video. So, go watch that first. In the end, I guarantee you'll see Tenkaichi in a completely different light. So, let's get started. First and foremost, I'd like to give a shout out to those who are still playing Tenkaichi today. Tenkaichi is a gaming series most deserving of a recognition not received by many platforms, especially those who prioritize depth and high-value combat. Here, my intent is to bring knowledge to the masses and attention to a beauty of perfection that lived in the shadows for far too long. The perfect fighting game is a rare thing. You could spend your life looking for one, and it would not be a wasted life. For all of you dedicated Tenkaichi fans, enjoy. When I was in college, one of my favorite classes was astronomy. It wasn't my major, but I was still fascinated with some of the theories regarding how gravity affected mass in space, how planets orbit the sun, their gravitational pull with satellites, how gravity affected the path of a comet, and so on. Did you know that the distance between the Earth and the Sun is 93 million miles? And the diameter of the Sun is 870,000 miles, which makes it 109 times wider than the Earth, and 330,000 times heavier than the Earth.
Shut up about the Sun! Shut up about the Sun!
One of the more interesting aspects of Tenkaichi that deviates from its traditional counterparts is the movement of the game, specifically how it follows the laws of focal adherence. For a brief description, focal adherence represents the mechanical laws of combat that two characters must adhere to in relation to their focal point, being the opponent. Orientation is one of these laws, represented with how offense, defense, and movement hold relation to the direction of the opponent. One example would be the execution of the Hadouken from Street Fighter II, with the distinction lying between down, down, right, right, high punch, and down, down, forward, forward, high punch. In Tenkaichi, once a character locks onto an opponent, it immediately establishes orientation, effectively altering the conditions of combat, respective to offense, defense, and movement. A great deal of this is already covered in the Depth series, but here, we're taking things a step further. Much like how gravity has an effect on movement of mass in space, here, you will see how the laws of focal adherence have an effect on movement between two characters on the battlefield. But let's first consider what variables are at play. As explained in the Depth series, each character is different, not only via the qualities pertaining to default combat understanding, but qualities branching into the depths of the game. In this case, let us first begin with the step-in barrier. Different characters of size possess varying barrier circumferences, specific to width and stance. The step-in barrier is designed to dictate your movement within the differing levels of focal adherence. Standing more than 5 feet away from Kid Buu may position your character outside the step-in barrier, while this may not prove successful when facing a great ape, Hirudegarn, or to a lesser extreme, the legendary Super Saiyan Broly. While the Enigma Dash allows the player to break free from the dominion of the barrier, it is still very important to become familiar with this concept.
You just don't get it, do you? You don't.
Now pay attention. If the opponent has crossed into your step-in barrier, your default limitation binds you to step-in execution. However, keep in mind that the same holds true if you have crossed into theirs. Following the logic, if your opponent's step-in barrier is larger than that of your chosen character, they don't have to be standing inside your step-in barrier for you to feel the effects of theirs. To summarize, if either opponent has crossed into either step-in barrier, both characters are bound to step-in execution. Either learn to become proficient in the world of grounded will, or live within the world of limitations, but know what they are. Now, we can take things even further by stating that there is no such thing as a fixed step-in barrier, in that the combat system is based on a connection between two characters, so that the circumference of a character's step-in barrier merely adjusts to account for the given opponent on the stage.
Now you know who you're fighting.
In this case, the circumference of Kid Boo's step-in barrier may not be limited to 5 feet. Indeed, the answer is reflected by his connection to his opponent. Such a theory would be more aligned with the laws of focal adherence, not to mention the laws of astronomical physics. The force between two objects are dependent on their mass, so too is the connection between characters. To see such effects at play, follow along. This is the planet stage. I've always liked this stage. I like the coloring, the style, a nice smooth surface with some areas of ground elevation for combat adaptation. Considering how the game was expected to be played, I'm sure this was all created for aesthetic appeal. But we as top gamers see things, appreciate things a bit differently. What I find most interesting about this stage, however, is what's at its center. I expect this was supposed to resemble a landing pad of some sort, or maybe the foundation for one of these buildings. For me, it's the makings of a high-quality training ground. Let's take a look. Here, you'll see a cross-section, surrounded by 5 circles, each one larger than the other, nearly resembling that of a target sign. We will familiarize ourselves with it, recognizing the innermost circle is Circle 1, the next is Circle 2, and so on. As stated in the Depth series, levels 1 and 2 of focal adherence will be envisioned through similar concepts, but here, we can actually view the effects and even take measurements. Place your opponent at ground zero, and measure your movement accordingly. Now, get ready because this next part's going to kick you in the face. I've been playing this game since its release, and have reached a level never before seen, and yet, there's something very basic that I have long chosen to discard, and in its place, embraced a measure of situational awareness, developed through years of experience and focus on the connection between characters. As we move forward, I can no longer afford to rely solely on the sixth sense. And if you are going to take this journey with me, neither can you. Laughably, I introduce to you the radar. In the Depth series, I found it necessary to explain the significance of the charge meter because it directly related to how we understood charged attacks. However, when considering the movement of the game, I always found it best to learn by playing, feeling how the game worked, giving little to no focus on what the radar was telling me. I'm sure many of you have shared my experience. Watching the radar, to me, is like looking at my feet when I'm walking, instead of taking in the environment. Or in the words of the great Bruce Lee, focusing on a finger that is pointing away to the moon, missing all the heavenly glory. We must absorb what is useful, discard what is not, and add what is uniquely our own. Perhaps it is the ego that has misled us all. Now let us watch what happens to the radar when we approach our opponent. And it is the light that shows us the way. Notice the movement of our character when our radar is completely lit and when it is not. Understand now that this is the boundary of the character's step-in barrier. Take note of our position within the training grounds. Our position, respective to any circle of measurement, defining the circumference of the barrier. Consider a mirror match with Kid Buu. The step-in barrier is fixed at the first circle. Dash execution is defined at this fixed line. This will be the case for most any character that is even close to comparable size. To character switch to legendary Super Saiyan Broly, notice this barrier is extended to the second circle. Switching characters to Kid Buu to face Broly would position us at the same spot, for our barriers have adjusted to account for our opponent. This is even more pronounced when facing Hirudegarn, as the barrier increases significantly, and decreases when facing a Cyberman. So now we can visually see where our barriers begin and where they end, respective to one character's connection with another. Just be receptive to what the radar is telling you. So at this point you might be saying, but Zero, I've been working the ground game for years now, and I've since been freed from the confines of the barrier. Why does any of this matter? Look, we are always looking to better understand this game, one that's proven a complete mystery to so many others, embarrassingly so. So, pay attention.
Stop asking so many fucking questions.
Understanding the limitations intended for your character is to understand the limitations placed on your opponent. They are bound to the same limitations as you are, and the radar is a visual indicator of where you both stand, even when you have broken free from its control. What comes next is whether or not your opponent too has discovered the same freedom. But that comes later. So let's now explore the influence of this connection and how movement is conducted on the battlefield. As briefly discussed in the Depth series, once orientation is established, all dash movement is naturally bound to the laws of focal adherence, exemplified with circumferential movement, somewhat like how gravity affects mass in space. Of course, we get to control the variables here, given that there's only two objects on the field, and we decide the direction of the dash. So, the results we get are purely based on factors relating to the connection between two objects, the qualities of those objects such as size, dash length, and speed, and ultimately, choice. This is easy to see when dashing to the side, for one can see here, Kid Buu is able to remain on the second circle until the dash is completed, and he is released from the opponent's influence. A perfect circle, as opposed to a planet's elliptical orbit, which is actually affected by gravity and the laws of physics. To see how these variables affect the outcome, see the resulting position of Broly's dash, achieving 1.25 revolutions as opposed to Kid Buu's 2.25 revolutions on the same orbit, with a significantly longer release, mind you. So what happens when other directional variants are introduced? Instead of simply dashing to the side, dashing diagonally away from the opponent still produces circumferential movement. The influence is still there. In fact, any side-based direction will result with circumferential movement to one degree or another. But to what degree does this influence affect our movement? What happens when we dash diagonally, but toward the opponent? Will we be pulled to a halt, standing at ground zero? Will we break through the atmosphere of his barrier and come crashing to the surface? So it turns out that the speed of the dash is enough to enter the step-in barrier, feel its influence for close-range revolution, and then escape the barrier, with the remainder of the dash adjusting to its effects. Of course, such results will vary from one character to another, respective to the varying qualities of the dash. Once again, see the difference between Kid Buu and Broly. For those of you who are practiced in the world of grounded will, initiating the Enigma Dash at ground zero automatically grants escape velocity, producing results similar to a diagonal dash away from the opponent. I find this very interesting, for while all side-based dashing is circumferential by nature, it appears that there's another quality to the movement system that, beyond the equilibrium, drives all side dash movement to centrifugal movement, including those that begin as centripetal. Of course, all of this is observed on the basis of how movement is conducted around a standing opponent. Understand that the very movement of the opponent changes the curve of the orbit. Your movement is not fixed to reflect your inputs. It changes, adapts to the actions of your opponent. Understanding this basic concept alone pushes well beyond the boundaries of traditional 2D gaming. Even the simplest example can be seen through effects placed on the equilibrium of the neutral orbit. If the opponent simply moves backward, even slightly, the structure of the perfect circle is broken, and the dash adjusts to account for repositioning. This change is most notable as the opponent continues to move backward, for this equilibrium is stretched to adjust to the opponent's change in position, whereas such adjustments are far less noticeable with the opponent's forward and side movement. Imagine that in a fighting game. Without landing a single attack, the opponent's very movement has a mechanical effect on your character. These concepts are far beyond the scope of what you would expect in any traditional fighter. One can see the effects of such an adjustment within the workings of the Infinity Dash, discovered by Tenkaichi 3 veteran Grandmaster Hawk. As the opponent is thrown, the centripetal force of the follow-up forward diagonal dash pursues the establishment of an equilibrium before transitioning into centrifugal movement. Seeing that the dash is faster than the momentum of a thrown opponent, optimal positioning can be obtained through timed dash cancellation at transition. A fantastic contribution, Hawk. Welcome to Tenkaichi 2. So what does this mean in terms of how combat is impacted? Through the use of grounded will and affiliated exploits, many of you have already discovered various methods to manipulate position. But it really depends on the strategy of the combatant, and as we progress through the depths of Tenkaichi, new territories are waiting to be explored, waiting to be conquered. While it's become somewhat of a meme at this point, the zoning aspect of Tenkaichi is built upon a system very unlike that of its traditional counterparts, but it still exists. In Street Fighter, all fighting games are confined to a much smaller area by comparison. Therefore, zoning out the opponent is much simpler, for there's a much smaller area that requires coverage. In Tenkaichi, the fighting stage is much, much larger, fitting as it is designed to accommodate for a fighting system that emphasizes movement. Like it or not, Tenkaichi is a fighting game, a great one at that, and while it may require some mental adjustments to accept it, traditional concepts like zoning still apply. The more one advances through the depths of the game, the more options one may find respective to the many traditional concepts found in fighting games. In the case of zoning, the first major push to embrace the keep-away method was by one of Tenkaichi's top players that goes by the name Acrylics. After learning the exploits of the ground game, from the Depth series I might add, Acrylics was then able to branch into a style specialized in zoning, a style he believed to be optimal in the world of Tenkaichi advancement. Use advanced movement, keep away from the opponent, use the Ki Blast to hinder the enemy with suppressing fire, and only attack as a response to the opponent's mistake. Classic Turtle Archetype, a playstyle known to be effective in many fighting games. For other styles, I recommend reading the book Playing to Win, Becoming the Champion by David Serlin. You'll find several of these archetypes represented throughout the history of Tenkaichi. Considering stage limitations and the dash construct, Tenkaichi's system is not designed to cater to the non-combatant. Zoning only proves useful when the keep-away artist is significantly superior in movement and skill, in a battle consisting of two opponents equal in skill, knowledge, and character choice. The pursuer has movement advantage. This does not go so far as to say zoning is not a viable option, for baiting out mistakes is a common tactic throughout the entirety of the game. Any player that can cancel a dash is instantly granted the neutral arsenal, super blasts, instant defense, or even shift manipulation for better positioning. The basis of an effective zoner is knowing how to attack and evade in a manner that hinders the opponent's method for approach, causing them to make mistakes. Understanding the viability of such a tactic, it's easy to understand why acrylics landed on this playstyle. These options have been implemented in various methods of combat execution, as seen by top players in Tenkaichi 3. The system is different than Tenkaichi 2, but much of it plays out the same way. Players implement dash cancellation with attacks into their every movement. Always attack, always forcing the opponent to adjust, to react, applying pressure to control the pace. Much like other fighting games, you'll find just as many attackers as zoners, further emphasizing the depth of the Tenkaichi combat system. Great job, acrylics. So where do we go from here? I've always tried to be as balanced a fighter as possible, placing emphasis on technical perfection, be it offense, defense, or movement. But I've never seen myself as an overly defensive player, or an overly offensive player. When it came to movement, I moved with precision, but was never overly aggressive with it. We did amazing things people still have not duplicated to this day. But according to Zoso's frame data, grounded will is performed on single frame execution. Pushing the limit on such a requirement would only come at the sacrifice of control. Some have even spent years trying to prove this theory wrong. None have prevailed. But what if we did? Nothing worth having comes easy, and just because it's never been done before doesn't mean it's impossible. To truly approach the limits of the game's movement system with perfect execution, this is to move with the gods. Taking a look at the Enigma Dash, specifically how it's connected through Mad Dash execution, canceling such a dash with Descent is a means of safeguarding the structure of dash exploitation, improving technical execution through calibrating risk of potentially mistimed inputs. Remember, grounded will is performed on single frame execution. If the dash is performed beyond that single frame, a dash is granted, but this is the distinction between the Enigma Dash and an aerial dash. Only one of these can be linked to supplementary dashes of grounded will. Dash cancellation grounds the character, allowing further grounded will execution, but this is a middleman that we must cut out if we are to move with the gods. Perfect frame execution is the goal. Once the timing is perfected, it is practice and determination that will reach the finish line. But first,
you gotta get speed. Demon speed. Speed's what we need. We need greasy, fast speed.
Understand now that all ground exploitation is superior to base ground movement, for you have full control at all times and can transition to the neutral arsenal at any second. No other fighting game is like this. You will be using frame-perfect inputs for your very basis of movement. Use your radar to visually see where you are breaking the barrier. Use your computer to figure out how the system is designed to work with your new movement. You are no longer working with the system. The system is now trying to work around you, trying to keep up, but you're playing with different rules. Most people would tell you that frame-perfect execution for default movement is asking too much. It's insane. And, well, yeah. But we are not like them. We are not the same. Easy to play, difficult to master. When all is said and done, you may find yourself moving like this. This is the movement of the gods. Enhanced freedom, enhanced zoning, enhanced foundation for all combat, further advancing Tenkaichi meta. I'm not sure if it's even possible in Tenkaichi 3. The jolt system may interfere with that, but that's for you to find out. Hawk, get on it. Know now that the laws of focal adherence are always at play, and we are always learning. Orientation is seen through nearly every action we make when locked onto the opponent, and it is within such laws that we can ascend. In the Depth series, we begin by explaining concepts like orientation and, furthermore, the details pertaining to toggled orientation. Orientation is re-established with every movement, every block, every attack, and it is through the very initiation of said attack that orientation is established. However, throughout the remainder of the attack, orientation is disabled, which allows an evading opponent to counter-strike. This basic concept is the foundation for proper strafe zoning in 3D combat games such as Mortal Kombat Deception. Indeed, while a single attack may disable orientation, the aggressive qualities of the attack may provide the opponent additional time to counter, and in some games, orientation may be disabled for an entire combo set. Once again, Tenkaichi 2 proves the outlier in its own special way. Much like other 3D fighters, Tenkaichi 2 is built upon a system that includes toggled orientation. However, the combo system is toggle receptive to character profile. In Budokai 3, we can see that evading an attack results with toggled orientation, and orientation is not re-established until the character once more defends, moves, or unleashes his next attack. In Tenkaichi 2, we can see how orientation is disabled when sidestepping a combo set. However, here's where Tenkaichi's combo system is unique. By using a simple dash just outside the barrier, we will provide the attacker enough time to execute a combo set, while the orbiting dash is fast enough to break the profile before combo conclusion. Breaking the profile is to cross the line separating the opponent's front from his rear. Notice that while before, the combo would drop orientation to be countered by the sidestep, once the profile is breached, the character immediately terminates the combo mid-set and tries to re-establish orientation before executing the next attack. In fact, during this orbital dash, I will spam the melee button so you can see what the character does. Notice, the character struggles to maintain orientation with multiple attempts to re-establish it while I'm spamming melee, providing multiple audio indicators with each reset attempt. Once again, we find that movement dictates the nature of combat. Now what happens when we activate God movement to establish an orbit? It's true one can simply use such movement any way they wish, but consider. When positioned at ground zero, remember that the user of grounded will is immediately granted escape velocity, but to then engage with side God movement will immediately cut into orbital revolution. Looking at the radar, one can see that with enough control, such an orbit can be maintained within the step-in barrier. Recall now, and I'll state it again because it's important. Understanding the limitations intended for your character is to understand the limitations placed upon your opponent. To control the orbit like this is to force the barrier upon the opponent, a level of focal adherence in which he is mechanically bound to step in execution, and you are not. A position in which broken orientation disallows melee and key blast to connect, where toggled orientation cannot keep up with the constant breaching of the profile, where all baseline attacks are neutralized. Activation of the super explosive wave would prove useless to anyone who is practiced in the timing of teleportation, and nearly all other super blasts are mechanically bound to backstep activation, transforming from variability of defensive requirements into trainable constants, or are outpaced by the speed of God movement. The only viable option for attack is the rush attack, but again, just like any other super blast, the forced backstep activation places all rush attacks as a constant. From a distance, one would be forced to defend the rush attack with variable judgment of distance, angle, speed, etc. But when forcing the barrier, the timing to defend a character's rush attack will be the same every time, respective of course to the qualities of the character's specific attack. Now, as I stated before, orientation is established through defense, attack, and movement. As explained in the Depth series, simply holding back, or any direction, will help with maintaining orientation, even when facing this level of movement. However, this leaves the defender, well, undefended, for one cannot guard while moving, and once the guard is initiated, remaining defense disables orientation, rendering him vulnerable to rear-positioned attacks. As for the user of God movement, maintaining side movement will widen the orbit as affected by the opponent's backward movement. To tighten the orbit, simply hold forward diagonal to incorporate centripetal movement. Such concepts can indeed be pushed to extreme close quarters, applying pressure to an already overwhelmed opponent. Such a tactic is called swarming. To put it plainly, whether you are maintaining a forced barrier or swarming your opponent, you are forcing the opponent to remain within the step-in barrier where their movement is limited by its mechanical design, where they are vulnerable and you are not. Now, before we get carried away, understand that there are methods of escaping the forced barrier, such as the short yet fast rush attack. It is not fast enough to connect with the orbiter, but it will break free from the orbit nonetheless. Jumping into the air and dashing in any direction will break free from the grounded threat. However, the orbiter always has options to follow up on such an escape artist, and in the end, forcing the barrier is a strategy designed to apply pressure, eliminate options from the opponent, and force a mistake. Ultimately, the only way to truly combat such a strategy is to learn grounded will, freeing oneself from the confines of the barrier being forced upon them, and furthermore, learn to move with the gods. If you can move with the gods, you can fight them. So here we are. It's the year 2022, and we're still pushing the limits of this game. The shining beacon of what's become known as the Golden Age of Dragon Ball Z gaming. We are not only playing the game in ways the creators never thought possible, but we've gone beyond the boundaries of even our own expectations. We are now moving like gods. Once you've learned how to properly harness this movement, how to zone with it, how to force the barrier with it, how to apply pressure at close range, all grounded movement is your domain. The uninitiated are merely playing at combat within a world you can now dominate as you see fit. No man would dare set foot where gods roam. Welcome to Tenkaichi Unlimited.